I have the pleasure to interview Liz Fernando, German Sri Lankan award-winning artist and photographer. You, Liz, were part of the Contemporary Art Festival in Colombo, the Columbuscope in Sri Lanka, and exhibited a photographic installation. Now, a fact that we both share is that we lived most of our lives in formative years in Germany, and growing up as children as a diaspora, I would say it's a very specific lived experience. In your piece for the Columbuscope, you refer to the Hannah Arendt's paradigmatic essay, We the Refugees, which is naming the self-conception of refugees, naming also a call against assimilation, but is actually advocating for politicization for themselves and for self-determination. Could you please elaborate on the choice of the text and how it influenced your work, in particular for this festival and for this installation?
Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Abhilasha. And of course, it's a pleasure to talk about the project, which was commissioned by Columbuscope and with the title One Last Night. Speaking about the text, maybe we can go into the presentation I have prepared. Where I'm just shortly, of course, it's a very, very complex text by Hannah Arendt. We kind of share the same city where we grew up in Germany, which is Hanover. And of course, I came across the readings, and I think a text, We Refugees, that became widely discussed, or let's say widely known as part of the last document, South as a State of Mind. And of course, it was always kind of a reference text, exactly like you referred to, for maybe a generation that shared the formative years in a country that is maybe not the country for our ancestors. And if you just see the text here, she starts, first of all, with this kind of very powerful idea of, in the first place, we don't like to be called refugees. So it's something that, identity building, nation state, and all these kind of things, that she kind of puts this full stop. I mean, we don't like the term refugees. And when I think about, and I might come back later to it, about the festival theme by Cecilia Visunia and Language is Migrant, where that term refugee always has this kind of very bad connotation, or we have this, like, the notion of it's something, which has difficulties. But of course, I was working with different stories from migration or about migration, and what it all kind of had in common was this kind of thing that I also read in her text. Our optimism indeed is admirable, even if we say so to ourselves. The story of our struggle has finally become known. And she speaks about, of course, the experience of the Second World War as a Jewish migrant to the US in exile. But and that story is, of course, widely known. Second generation experiences of us are not so widely known, and still, like, being not widely discussed. And I think whenever we as cultural practitioners have a chance to discuss that, might it be in a visual way, might it be in a scholarly way, we should do it.
I was remembering walking through the exhibition on the festival opening, and your work was one of the few open air displayed pieces, also located within a historical site, the Cinematograph, which is a war memorial in Colombo next to the public library. And the library itself was an exhibition venue of this year's Columbuscope. How did the positionality and the arrangement of the images and the historical aura of the site influenced each other in form of an interplay for you? Or could you show us some of the footage maybe of the installation, how it was arranged?
Of course, So the installation, as you pointed out correctly, was one of the few, let's say, on-site installation or site-specific installation. And that was also doing, like, it was a discussion between the curating team with Anushka Rajendran and Natasha Janwala. As I'm not usually an artist who works in a large scale or outside, I work a lot site specific, but not necessarily outside. So it was more or less the first time for me. It was challenging, of course, but we all felt it makes sense because, as I mentioned before, it's 3 stories. I mean, I of course have, same like you, we share that background about yeah, maybe not migration itself, but of course growing up in yeah, in this kind of vacuum, you know, so not really knowing where do we belong. And so I kind of collected then 3 stories. Actually I collected more, but we decided to exhibit 3 stories. And one of these stories was a story from, of course, the inter-German migration, which lots of people also forget, because of course we shared our formative years in Germany, but I mean, we grew up in a country that was still shattered by the Second World War, even we don't want to believe it. So there was, of course, a huge influx from the eastern side of Germany, which is now Poland and Ukraine. And so they're so-called Vertreibung in Germany, and there's a huge population in Germany who came from the eastern borders. I mean, I don't mean the GDR, even further back, as I said, I mean, which is now Poland. And there was a story about which kind of accompanied me even in my childhood, when you meet elders and they talk about that time when they were not welcomed in Germany. I mean, they're Germans, but they were not welcomed after this ordeal of many years migrating or being a refugee. And so I'm telling that story, which you see also behind of me at this war memorial. So I saw the war memorial, and the team came up with me and shared with me, you have the possibility to do it at the war memorial, which I felt, yes, of course, why not? Because I saw, first of all, that inscription in memory of 1939 to 1945, which you can also see here. And I felt, I spoke to this woman who's now 85, and she remembers those years, her formative years, of course, being a refugee, being seeking for asylum, actually. I mean, seeking for asylum in her own country. And she only survived the Second World War, or that the journey of migration, hiding underneath a frog, because she was separated from her family and they wanted to send her back to the eastern border, and she was separated, and she was, of course, crying and shouting. And I mean, it's kind of speaking to a woman who's now 85, who remembers something that is now more than 70 years back, and she was hiding underneath this frog. And it's metaphors. And I felt, if we speak about a war memorial, we also have to speak again to these stories which are not widely known. And this is why I played with this memorial, and this is why we decided, even these are not stories which again have to be like kept in silence or in some corner or whatever, so they have to be out. Yeah.
This shows also again to me the powerful effect in which like these images speaks to us as the one who are observing it, but then also the interplay with this particular site and then the commission work that you were doing. So it really had its effect also when I was walking through it during the opening. Thank you, Liz. Now, speaking about this commission work, maybe you can also tell us about in which way this festival theme, Language is Migrant, resonate with your practice and also had an impact on your usual or like artistic approach and research methods.
So as I was pointing out at the beginning about Hannah Arendt and the text that kind of accompanied me all my life, or let's say later stages of my life, and so that how Cecilia works with this term, language is migrant, is she explains, you know, so, and that is also something that occurred to us during the festival. There were lots of international artists coming together virtually, and of course as much as possible during COVID times physically. And we all, I don't think we were like all picked because we have some sort of a story to tell. It's what occurred to us is all of us are somehow migrants. None of us, you know, can say like we are from here and you are not from here. All of us have some stories to tell about or from ancestors or from her, how it is to leave a home, how it is to leave something behind, and what carries you through is Hannah Arendt talking about optimism, talking about being strong. And so that is something that really kind of inspired me to read Cecilia's text about how she says, how she explains the word migration. I mean, she dissects the word and then explains it and say there's nothing which has a bad connotation. It's actually something very, very positive. And that is what I felt is it was the perfect background for me to tell the story, which I have been developing with Anushka Rajanjan about 4 years ago. So this is a work that we developed over 4 years and that we now exhibited here, and we are continuing to do so. And yeah, I feel that for lots of us that the text by Cecilia really inspired us to come from different angles and to narrate our story, our known stories.
I was also asking, or actually, this intergenerational memories and migration are in general also central in your works, which are also displaying certain intimate moments or capturing them in stories, twists of fates by these migration movements captured in these images. And then especially it can also be translated or embedded in a broader social, historical, and political context, as you did with the German history. To access this archival data, photography is a perfectly preserving form. So was it in general also for you to explore this with this historical site that you were doing for the first time or working there for the first time?
I mean, in my practice, I work a lot with archival images, accessing archives, questioning archives, questioning the approach from the South Asian archive, which has, of course, a lot of difficulties in itself, which arise during my studies. And with memory, I mean, I always question how a visual memory is influenced by photography. My background is from photography. And for me, it was, of course, a continuation in some sort of a way of the way I work. I sometimes, if I don't have any evidence, visual evidence, I create it somehow with my own lens, with my own memory, with other people's memory, and then I create it. So even this story, what you saw on the war memorial, of course, this lady, she doesn't have any visual evidence of that time. So we talk about imagined images or like memory of a child that is now 85. And so I have to rely on some sort of an archive. But again, like this is very universal. She's not the only one who suffered from such a thing. So it always kind of allows me to be universal and not to go into somebody's completely personal archive. But there's a mix, of course. There are different stories. There another story who has very personal archives, and so I'm mixing that up, also showing like everybody can join that conversation, not pointing completely into one limited archive. Yeah.